The hospital sat quiet at the edge of Oregon's national forest, tucked between snow-heavy trees and winding roads that barely made it onto maps. Inside, room 214 waited like it always had, dimly lit, rarely used, and spoken of only in hushed tones among the overnight staff. No one could explain why, but patients placed in that room seldom recovered. It was cold in a way that lingered, even when the heat was turned high. Some called it the still room, others simply avoided it. That winter, Ilara Quinn, 7 years old and silent as snowfall, was wheeled into 214. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her breath barely stirred the plastic tubing beside her. For days she hadn't spoken, hadn't blinked at light or sound. Her mother, Mara, a former elementary school teacher who had given up everything to sit beside her, stopped asking questions and started counting breaths instead. It was all that felt real anymore. Outside the window, snow drifted in slow spirals. Machines hummed low and steady. The air held the weight of waiting. No one expected what would happen next. Not when a black and white shape appeared at the end of the hallway, quiet, low to the ground, and moving with unsettling purpose. The security cameras never saw where it came from. One moment the hall was empty, the next it was there. Perhaps drawn by a force beyond understanding, as if summoned by Ilara's silent plea. A stray German shepherd, soaked with snowmelt and eyes gleaming with something too aware, paused outside room 2014. Then, as if summoned, he stepped inside. The hallway outside room 214 had long been the quietest stretch in the hospital. Even the most seasoned nurses avoided lingering there. So when a black and white shape emerged from the end of the corridor, soaked with snow, silent, steady, no one stopped him. Cameron, the night nurse, was the first to see him. The dog walked calmly as if he belonged. When he passed her, she felt a strange warmth in her chest, as if someone had just whispered, "Let him through." She did. Inside the room, Ilara Quinn lay still. Machines pulsed quietly around her, glowing pale green and blue. Her mother, Mara, sat half asleep in the recliner, her body draped in a hospital blanket. The door creaked. Mara looked up and froze. For a moment, she couldn't move. A stray dog stood in her daughter's hospital room. That should have terrified her, but it didn't. 12 years ago, Mara had raised a German shepherd named Toby from puppyhood. He'd been her best friend, her shadow, her comfort through grief, through single motherhood, through everything. He had passed away just 2 winters ago. The dog before her looked almost identical. Same fur, same eyes, the same stillness when he looked at her. Something shifted in Mara's chest, her breath caught. She didn't speak, didn't move, but in her heart, something opened. She nodded, just once. As if that was all the dog had been waiting for, he stepped forward. Quietly, confidently. He climbed onto the mattress with practiced care and lay down beside Ilara. Then slowly, he placed one paw on top of her tiny, open hand. Nothing happened. And then it did. Ilara's fingers curled, ever so slightly. Her voice cracked the silence. "You really came." Initially, no one planned to let the dog stay. Hospital protocols were clear. No animals on patient mattresses, especially in critical care. But as Orion settled beside Ilara, a sense of calm filled the room, challenging the rigidity of rules. But room 2014 had stopped following protocol a long time ago. Ilara had been moved to palliative care just 36 hours earlier. Her organs were slowing. Her brain showed almost no response. Dr. Hale had delivered the update himself, voice low and clinical. Mara hadn't argued. She hadn't even cried, just nodded, numb. So when the dog appeared, this quiet, solemn creature with eyes that seemed to understand more than any human in the room, no one had the energy left to protest. It was a nurse named Sienna who said it first, whispered really. "If he's what's keeping her here, just let him stay." No one disagreed. So Orion stayed. At first, he simply lay beside her, unmoving, unblinking. Then came the twitch of her fingers, the whispered words, and within hours, her heart rhythm began to stabilize. By morning, her oxygen levels had risen. Her pupils were reactive. The neurologist's team, once mechanical and dispassionate, now gathered at the doorway, hushed and unsure. "She's responding to something," Dr. Hale murmured, staring at the monitor. "I just don't know what." By the second night, he didn't hesitate. When security raised concerns about the dog still being in the room, he signed the clearance himself. "She's dying," he said. "If this dog is helping, he stays, no questions." No one asked again. And somehow, the longer Orion remained, the more present Ilara became. She began tracking voices with her eyes. She squeezed Mara's fingers. She responded to light. It was subtle, slow, but it was there. She was coming back. On the morning of the third day, Ilara sat up with help. Her voice, still faint, was clear when she looked at Mara and asked, "Can I have some applesauce?" Mara dropped the spoon in shock. Nurses cried openly in the hallway. No one dared call it a miracle, not yet. But for the first time in weeks, they started calling her by name again. Ilara, not the child in 214. Staff paused outside the room, some pressing their palms to the glass, not to check vitals, just to witness. Because something real was happening. Not a cure, not a theory, but a reason to hope. And in room 214, that had become enough. By the end of the week, Ilara was no longer the child everyone had quietly expected to lose. She sat upright for hours now, sometimes sketching with crayons one of the nurses had brought, other times just staring out the window, Orion's head resting comfortably in her lap. But something else had begun to shift. At first, it was barely noticeable. Only the night staff mentioned it. The temperature in room 214 always dropped after midnight, no matter how high the thermostat was set. One nurse claimed she saw the room lights dim without anyone touching the switch. Another swore she heard the faint sound of whispering when she passed the door. Orion noticed it too. He stopped sleeping through the night. Instead, he sat upright for hours, posture alert, gaze fixed on the far left corner of the room, the one cloaked in shadows cast by the heart monitor. Mara saw it first. She woke one night to find Orion still and rigid, his eyes locked onto that dark corner. When she whispered his name, he didn't respond. His ears twitched, muscles tight. He was listening, or maybe waiting. The next day, a new nurse, Ava, came in for routine vitals. Young and unfamiliar with the odd energy of room 214, she entered with practiced cheer. "Good morning, Ilara," she smiled. Ilara spoke before she could continue. "Hey, she doesn't sleep like we do." The room fell silent. Ava blinked, thrown off by the girl's tone. Calm, steady, far older than her years. Mara looked up sharply from her chair, startled. Ilara's fingers moved slowly through Orion's fur, her face unreadable. Later that afternoon, Dr. Hale returned with a new set of brain scans. Progress continued. Cortical activity was increasing in areas once considered unreachable. But he had begun documenting something else too: Orion's behavior. In his private notes, he scribbled things no medical journal would ever print. Dog alert at 3:12, IEM. Patient stared into corner. Temperature drop again. He didn't know what to make of it, but he felt it too. There was something in the room, or maybe something watching it. It happened on the 7th night. The snow outside had thickened into a silent, suffocating curtain. Inside room 214, the air was still, heavy, not with fear, but with something waiting. Ilara was asleep, her small hand resting lightly on Orion's back. Mara dozed in the recliner, wrapped in her wool cardigan, the room dim except for the green pulse of the heart monitor. At 3:14 a.m., Orion rose. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood, muscles tense, ears forward. His gaze returned to the same corner. And this time, he moved. One slow step, then another. He positioned himself between Ilara and the shadowed corner, tail stiff, head low. Mara stirred awake, sensing the shift. She sat up quickly, heart thudding. "Ilara?" she whispered. The girl didn't stir. But then the lights buzzed. One flickered, then popped. Glass cracked. the room plunged into a faint, trembling darkness, and Alara began to convulse. Her back arched, her mouth opened in a silent scream. The monitors shrieked, heart rate erratic, oxygen levels crashing. Mara screamed for help, slamming the call button. No one came. In the flickering shadows, Orion lunged. And he didn't hit a wall. He didn't hit air. He hit something. The sound was a guttural snarl, ripped from deep inside him. He attacked nothing visible, but with purpose. His body slammed the empty space near the corner, again and again, claws scraping tile. And then Ilara gasped. The lights stabilized. The machines steadied. The air shifted, warmer, lighter, breathable again. Dr. Hale burst into the room, eyes wide, taking in the broken light, the chaos, the girl's limp body cradled in Mara's arms, and the dog, standing between them and the corner, his back arched, teeth bared at nothing. "What happened?" he asked. No one answered. Ilara whimpered. Then, in the softest voice, she whispered into her mother's chest. Didn't let it take me." The snow had begun to melt, but room 214 still felt like winter. Even with the heater humming, there was a chill that clung to the corners, a tension that hadn't lifted since the night the lights shattered. Alara hadn't spoken much since. She answered when asked, she nodded, sometimes smiled, but there was something quieter in her now, like she was listening to things no one else could hear. Mara noticed it first, the way Ilara would glance toward the same shadowed corner before falling asleep, how she traced circles on Orion's fur with absent fingers, how she no longer hummed when the room was silent, but only when the dog growled low in his throat. "She's changed," one nurse said softly. "It's not just the healing, it's like she's carrying something." Dr. Hale had begun visiting without the clipboard. He stayed longer, leaned in more. Not because he expected medical updates, there were none, but because something about the room asked for silence. Then, one morning, Ilara looked up from her blanket and asked, "Do names have power?" Mara paused, coffee halfway to her lips. "Sometimes," she said slowly. "Why?" Ilara didn't answer. But that night, it happened again. Orion was the first to move. Ears twitching, tail stiff, the lights dimmed slightly, the temperature dropped. Mara pulled the blanket tighter around Ilara. "What's wrong?" she whispered. Ilara didn't look scared. She looked ready. "It's back," she said. Orion rose from the bed, the same stance, the same place, facing the corner, and then, without turning, Ilara spoke. "If I say its name, it can't stay." Mara froze. Her mother heart screamed, "No! Don't invite it! Don't draw it near!" But her eyes saw the steadiness in her daughter, the calmness in Orion. "What name, Ilara?" The child's fingers tightened around Orion's fur. She whispered a sound, sharp, fractured, like broken glass and old stone. It wasn't English, wasn't anything Mara had heard before. The lights dimmed further. The air snapped cold. And Orion barked. Not like before. This time it was thunder. A shattering, commanding, furious bark. And the silence broke. Something lifted, like the air had been compressed and suddenly released. Ilara gasped and fell back into the pillows. She was shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Mara rushed to her side. "What did you do? What was that?" Ilara opened her eyes slowly. Her voice was soft but firm. "I said what it didn't want me to know." "And what was that?" "Its name," she said, "and now it can't hide." Orion returned to the bed, curling beside her, one paw protectively over her chest. And the room finally felt warm. In the quiet days after the night everything changed. Ilara's room became more than a hospital suite. It became a place no one could quite explain. Her recovery was documented, measured, but never understood. Doctors used words like spontaneous remission, neurological reactivation, and unexpected cellular regeneration. But all of them knew. None of those terms explained what had happened in room 214. and none explained Orion. So they stopped trying. Instead, they watched as Ilara went from comatose to conscious, from silent to smiling, watched as her body healed faster than anyone thought possible, and always, Orion was beside her, quiet, guarded, a presence no longer questioned. One afternoon, days before discharge, Dr. Hale sat beside Mara, a sealed envelope in hand. "This was dropped off anonymously at the front desk," he said. "I think it's about him." Mara opened it slowly. Inside was a photo, old, sun-faded, a girl, no older than Ilara, standing in the snow with a German shepherd by her side. Not just any dog. Him. Same deep eyes, same upright ears, same proud stance. On the back of the photo, 1952, room 214, he saved her too. The resemblance was uncanny, suggesting a guardian that transcended time. Mara looked up, eyes wide. "This can't be possible." Dr. Hale leaned forward. "That's not all. I did some digging. Every decade, at least once, room 214 gets a patient with an unexplained remission tied to a black and white dog no one registered. Every time he appears. Every time he vanishes after." "But why Ilara?" Mara whispered. "Why now?" Ilara answered that question herself later that evening. "He didn't come for me," she said. "He came because it came back." "The shadow?" She nodded. "It's old, and it waits in quiet places, places where people stop believing they'll be seen. That's when it feeds. But Orion, he remembers it. He's fought it before. He lost someone once. So now he waits." Mara stared. "You mean he's not just a dog?" Ilara shook her head. "He's more, or maybe not more than a dog, just more than time." That night, Orion stood once more at the corner. Not rigid, not ready to fight, but watching, like he always had. The lights didn't flicker. The cold didn't return. The room was finally still, and so was he. On discharge day, the hospital hallways felt unusually quiet. Ilara walked slowly, bundled in her pink coat, Orion at her side. Staff stood quietly as she passed. No applause, no speeches, just reverence. At the door, Mara turned to Dr. Hale. "Will he go with us?" Dr. Hale looked at the dog, then back at Ilara. "He came for her. I think he'll stay until she doesn't need him anymore." Ilara knelt, pressing her forehead to Orion's. "You remembered me," she whispered. And perhaps he had. Perhaps they had met before, in another life, another fight, another room where a child had been slipping away. Maybe some spirits come back not as ghosts, but as guardians. And maybe love, when it's deep enough, transcends time, flesh, and even species. Orion stood, silent as ever. He didn't wag. He didn't bark. But he walked beside her, not as a pet, not as a therapy dog, but as something older, something sent. And in that final moment, as the doors opened and Ilara stepped into light, Mara turned back one last time. Room 214 stood quiet. But somehow, not empty. The town of Hyannis had never known a quieter child than Emily Thompson. At just 6 years old, she moved into her grandparents' weathered Cape Stock home after a tragedy that shattered the rhythm of 3 lives. Her parents, David and Claire Thompson, renowned dog trainers who worked closely with canine units across Massachusetts, were killed instantly when a semi-truck skidded through a red light on a rainy October evening. Emily, strapped in the back seat, survived the crash without a scratch. But something inside her did not. In the days that followed, Emily spoke to no one. Not a single word. Doctors called it selective mutism, likely a trauma response. Therapists tried puzzles, play sessions, and soft music. Nothing reached her. She retreated inward, silent as snowfall, unreachable. Except by the dogs. 6 German shepherds, Max, Bella, Luna, Duke, Shadow, and Rex, were all that remained of her parents' legacy. Former working dogs, impeccably trained, they had once responded to police officers, rescue teams, and search crews. Now they answered only to Emily. and somehow she spoke to them. Not in words, but in whispers the world couldn't hear. Subtle hand movements, a nod, a tilt of the head. No one had taught her. She just knew. Her grandparents, Robert and Martha Thompson, both in their 70s, did their best. Their son and daughter-in-law were gone. Now they were raising a traumatized granddaughter and caring for 6 high-energy working dogs they couldn't begin to manage. Still, they never considered giving the dogs away. They saw what no doctor could explain, how the animals stayed close, calming Emily's restless hands, sleeping curled around her at night like silent sentries. Behind the peeling blue door of the Thompson house, a bond was forming. Wordless, unshakable, mysterious, and soon, the entire town would take notice. It started as a whisper, just a glimpse here and there. A few early risers in downtown Hyannis swore they had seen a little girl walking 6 massive German shepherds without a single leash. By the second week, it wasn't a whisper anymore. Every morning, just after sunrise, Emily Thompson stepped quietly from her grandparents' house, her red sneakers padding down the porch steps. One by one, the dogs fell into place around her, moving like shadows at her side. Max, the largest, always took point, while Bella and Duke flanked her closely. No leashes, no raised voices, just quiet, seamless coordination. At first, Emily avoided Main Street, sticking to the side roads and the quiet park paths. But as her confidence grew, so did her route. By the end of the month, she was leading the dogs through the heart of downtown, past the bakery, the hardware store, the cafe, her small frame nearly lost among the sea of disciplined fur and muscle. People paused whatever they were doing. Drivers slowed to a crawl. Shopkeepers peered out their windows. Phones came out. Videos were posted. "She walks them better than my grandkids mind me," muttered Frank Delaney, owner of the hardware store, as he paused one morning while unlocking his door. Emily never spoke, never waved. Her eyes stayed focused. Her hand movements minimal but effective. The dogs responded instantly. A glance from her, and 2 would shift formation. A flick of her wrist, and the group would pause at a crosswalk, forming a semicircle around her until it was safe to proceed. To some, it was magical, to others, unnerving. She became known as the Dog Whisperer of Hyannis, a title whispered with awe by tourists and with growing concern by a few watchful residents. From behind the lace curtains of her Victorian home on Elm Street, Margot Ellery watched the girl every morning. Margot had spent 4 decades as a respected elementary school principal, and even in retirement, she carried herself like someone who still gave morning announcements and corrected grammar in grocery lines. To her, order was safety, rules were love, and what she saw each morning out her window defied both. A 6-year-old child, mute, walking unaccompanied with 6 full-grown German shepherds? She tightened her shawl and pursed her lips. "It's reckless," she told her husband over toast. "Dangerous. Irresponsible." He had heard this before, many times. He offered a non-committal grunt. Margot, however, had already made up her mind. If no one else would intervene, she would. She began by attending town council meetings, slipping Emma's name, always politely, always the Thompson girl, into public safety discussions. Then came printed flyers, and finally a petition titled, "For the Safety of Our Children and Community." She knocked on doors with practiced charm, wielding her clipboard like a teacher with a lesson plan. "It's not about blame," she told neighbors. "It's about responsibility. That poor child has been through enough. We need to protect her and the rest of the town." But beneath her firm voice and conviction, something deeper stirred. A discomfort she couldn't quite name. A memory she had spent 2 years trying to silence. Margot Ellery's petition gathered momentum faster than anyone expected. By the end of the first week, she had over 30 signatures, mostly from concerned parents and retirees who remembered Margaret from her school days. She hosted what she called community coffee hours on her wraparound porch, where the conversation always circled back to the same question: what if something goes wrong? It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It became about liability, about precedent, about fear. "She's a sweet child," people would say, often with a sympathetic shrug. "Quiet, tragic story, but 6 full-size German shepherds, off-leash, led by a child who doesn't speak? That's not heartwarming, it's dangerous. Sooner or later, something will happen. It's just a matter of time." Soon, the town council was flooded with emails. A local blogger wrote a post titled, "A Town on the Edge. Who's watching the dog girl?" It was shared over 10,000 times in 2 days. Concerned citizens called local officials. Out-of-towners chimed in. In response, the town called for a hearing, not a trial, but an official public review of the situation. Representatives from Child Protective Services, Animal Control, and the police department were invited to attend. Emily, of course, had no idea. Each morning, she continued her quiet ritual through town, her 6 dogs forming a living shield around her, responding to each gentle cue as if they were extensions of her will. She walked with eyes lowered, never looking at the clusters of people gathering to film or whisper behind their coffee cups. The evaluation began on a crisp Monday morning. At precisely 8:00 a.m., a silver government sedan pulled up in front of the Thompson residence. Out stepped Dr. Elias Monroe, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and nonverbal communication, and Janet Ruiz, a veteran caseworker from the Department of Children and Families. Both were experienced, professional, and had read the reports, but nothing had prepared them for what they were about to witness. Martha greeted them at the door, wringing her hands. "Emily's in the living room with the dogs," she said quietly. "She doesn't like new people. Please, don't speak too loudly." The 2 professionals entered the modest home, careful with their steps. There, on a worn carpet, sat Emily, cross-legged, surrounded by all 6 German shepherds. Max rested beside her, alert but calm, his eyes tracking the visitor's every move. For a moment, no one spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath. Janet glanced at Dr. Monroe, who gave the slightest nod. They wouldn't rush this. Whatever was happening here, it needed to be witnessed slowly, on its own terms. For the next several days, the team observed Emily's routines, her feeding schedule, grooming time, structured hand signals, and of course the morning walks. Every interaction revealed something new. A flick of her fingers sent Duke to the kitchen. A silent pause made Rex sit. A faint whistle moved Luna and Bella to formation. Emily never spoke, but the dogs responded as though her thoughts were theirs. "It's not just obedience," Dr. Monroe noted. "It's a kind of mutual language, co-created, alive." But the most startling moment came late Wednesday morning. Martha had just finished setting a kettle on the stove when she heard a muffled thump, a sound that didn't belong. She turned, heart skipping, just as Robert staggered into the hallway, his face pale, his breath ragged. "Robert?" she called, voice trembling. Before she could move, Max exploded through the living room doorway like a bullet of instinct. No command, no hesitation. His paws skidded on the hardwood floor as he lunged forward, not with aggression, but urgency. In one smooth motion, he pressed his broad body into Robert's knees, guiding him gently down before the collapse could turn dangerous. Robert crumpled against the wall, wheezing. Max stood over him, unmoving except for the flick of an ear, his body forming a barrier between Robert and everything else. His nose touched Robert's hand, once, twice, then again, urgent but controlled. Emily appeared next, silent, fast, focused. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the floor as she darted forward, her small hands already motioning commands the other dogs instantly obeyed. Luna and Shadow froze in place. Rex whined, but didn't move. Martha, phone in hand, was already dialing 911 with shaking fingers, tears forming in her eyes. She couldn't stop staring, not at Robert, not at the phone, but at Max, at what he had done, at how fast he had known, at how he hadn't waited for permission, he had simply acted. And somehow, Emily had followed without a word. Dr. Monroe turned to Janet Ruiz, his voice hushed with awe. "That dog, didn't just react, he anticipated. Later that afternoon, a veterinary behaviorist confirmed what they had seen. Max was displaying classic signs of medical alert behavior, a rare, often untrainable ability seen in only a handful of service dogs worldwide. Janet took notes with trembling fingers. What had started as a safety concern was now becoming something else entirely, a case of extraordinary connection, healing, and instinct, something that no law or protocol had ever been designed to handle. The courtroom at Barnstable County Courthouse was filled to capacity. Locals, reporters, and concerned citizens crowded onto wooden benches, the air thick with anticipation. At the front, seated beside her grandparents and their pro bono attorney, Emily Thompson sat silently, her small hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She had not spoken a word since arriving. At the opposite table, Margot Ellery sat with her attorney, back straight, expression composed. She wore her reputation like armor, but her eyes flickered toward the child more than once. When the judge entered, Sandra Ostrowski, known for her fairness and no-nonsense rulings, the room fell into hush. Janet Ruiz was the first to testify, summarizing the investigation. She spoke of Emily's trauma, her mutism, and the dog's exceptional discipline. Dr. Monroe followed, describing Emily's communication system with the dogs as a nonverbal language of mutual trust, developed outside traditional frameworks. Videos were shown. Emily leading the dogs across intersections, forming protective circles, giving silent commands. The courtroom murmured in disbelief. Then came the moment no one expected. After both sides had presented their case, Judge Ostrowski leaned forward. "I'd like to hear from Emily Thompson," she said gently, "only if she wishes." All eyes turned toward the child. Marta leaned down, whispering something. Emily didn't move. Her small shoulders tightened, her fingers clenched the edge of her dress. She shook her head once, sharply, then held perfectly still, as if the weight of the room might crush her if she breathed the wrong way. But then, something shifted. She looked up, first at the judge, then at the rows of strangers watching her, then down. Not at an empty space, but at Max, lying quietly by her side, his eyes on her, steady and calm. His presence was her permission. With trembling legs, Emily stood. Her voice came like a breath torn from a wound. Fragile, raw. "Max pulled me out of the car." The entire courtroom went silent. Even the air seemed to hold still. Emily's lips parted again, her voice cracked, but she kept going, one word at a time, as if each had to be carried through fire. "It was burning. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. He got me out." Her eyes flicked to the others, watching her without blinking, utterly still. "They helped me, all of them." She swallowed, her chest rising with effort. A long pause. Then, "They keep the nightmares away." She looked straight at the judge now, voice steadier, almost defiant in its softness. "They're not just dogs. They're everything I have left. They're my family." No one spoke. Some wiped tears, others simply bowed their heads, feeling something break open in them. And in that quiet, in the smallest of voices, Emily had said the most important thing of all. Martha wept. A reporter dropped his pen. Judge Ostrowski held Emily's gaze with steady kindness. "Thank you," she said quietly. In that moment, the case changed. It was no longer about 6 dogs or one child's silence. It was about voice, about survival, about healing that didn't look the way most people expected, but was no less real. That evening, long after the courtroom had emptied, Margot Ellery sat alone in her car across from the Thompson house. The porch light was on. Through the window, she saw shadows moving. Martha in the kitchen, Robert in his chair, and Emily curled up on the rug beside Max, her small hand resting on his back. Margot gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The next morning, she knocked on the Thompsons' door. Martha answered, wary but polite. "I need to speak with you," Margot said quietly. "All of you." They sat awkwardly in the living room. Emily stayed on the floor, surrounded by the dogs, eyes wary. Margot cleared her throat. "There's something I didn't say in court. Something I've never said." She paused, unable to look at them. "I was the one driving the other car, the night David and Claire died." Silence fell like glass shattering. "I told the police it was an accident, bad weather, poor visibility. That's true, but I had wine at lunch. Not enough to fail the test, but enough that I shouldn't have been behind the wheel." Her voice broke. "I saw Emily with those dogs day after day, and it was like being haunted. I told myself I was protecting her, the town, but really, I was trying to silence my guilt." Emily didn't move, but Max did, stepping between them, calm but watchful. Margot didn't flinch. "I'm not looking for forgiveness," she said softly. "I just need to say it so I can finally be free of the weight I've carried all this time." For a long moment after Margot Ellery's confession, no one in the Thompson living room spoke. Martha's face had gone pale. Robert stared at the floor, his fingers trembling on the armrest, and Emily, still silent, still curled beside Max, watched Margot with eyes far older than 6 years should carry. Then, without a word, Emily crawled forward and reached for Max's collar. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, just stood still, breathing evenly. Emily looked up at Margot. Then, after a pause that felt like it stretched forever, she shook her head, not in blame, but with something softer, something like grace. Robert was the one who finally broke the silence. "What you did was terrible," he said, voice rough. "But living with it, owning it, that takes something too." Martha nodded, her eyes damp. "We won't tell," she said softly. "Not the town, not the court. Let the story end here." Margot's shoulders sagged with a kind of sorrowful relief. She didn't thank them. There were no words big enough for that. She simply stood, whispered, "I'm so sorry," and walked out the door. At the end of the week, Judge Ostrowski issued her formal ruling, one that aligned with what everyone in the room already knew in their hearts. Emily Thompson would be allowed to keep all 6 of her dogs under professional supervision. Max was formally registered as a service animal. The town returned to its rhythm, but something had shifted. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Emily walked down Main Street, this time with her head held high. Her red sneakers tapped against the pavement. Max walked at her left, the others close behind. She spoke now. Not often, not loudly, but clearly. To her grandparents, to the dogs, to the world, in her own time. Behind her, 6 tails wagged in perfect rhythm, not just as companions, but as pieces of a life rebuilt. And for the first time in a long, long while, Emily Thompson was truly home.